Hello, and welcome to Synergy's webinar series, Climate Action 101, Carbon Management for Tourism. My name is Kaylee Anderson, and I'm the Managing Partner at Synergy Enterprises. Thank you for joining us to learn more about how tourism organizations can take part in responsible carbon management. In this series, we'll cover the basics of carbon accounting for tour operators, destinations, events, and more. The series is broken into 3 parts: measure, reduce, and restore. Each of these will be presented by one of Synergy's core team members. Whether you're a tour operator, DMO, hotel, or other tourism organization, understanding your carbon impact is integral to responsible business. In this 3-part series, we'll explore what you need to do to measure your carbon footprint, look at strategies for carbon reduction, potentially the most important step, and explore the carbon reduction projects and carbon offset markets. Today, I'll give you a quick introduction to Synergy and a brief climate update. Then we'll jump right into the basics of carbon accounting, which will include an overview of Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. We'll explore a few sample inventories from real tourism businesses, and finally, look at what it takes to establish your first carbon footprint or baseline. All right, let's get started with an introduction to Synergy. Synergy is a corporate sustainability management firm empowering businesses to minimize carbon emissions and water consumption. Our services range from carbon footprints to strategic planning and cover a lot in between. We believe businesses have the opportunity to impact global change and lead the world into a new age of environmental and social responsibility. Our clients include tourism, tech, travel, and more, and Synergy has also established a foundation to promote sustainability efforts on Vancouver Island. The Synergy Sustainability Institute is home to the Earth Day Power Hour, Victoria's Food Eco District, the Vancouver Island Green Business Certification, which certifies businesses as silver, gold, or green based on the number of actions they take to minimize their impact, Project Zero, which is a circular economy initiative, and the Vancouver Island EcoStar Awards. Synergy is also one of the 4 co-founders of Canada's Sustainable Tourism Conference, Impact, along with Destination Greater Victoria, BD Tartan, and Starboard Enterprises. Impact is entering its 3rd year, and if you want to learn more about the issues and solutions the tourism industry is facing in regards to responsible tourism, check out the conference proceedings papers from 2018 and 2019 available for free online. As I noted in an earlier slide, we don't work exclusively with tourism, but we have found it to be one of the most progressive and engaged industries in our portfolio. And as we move into the climate update, you'll see why this is quite fitting. Tourism is responsible for 8% of global emissions. At least half of this is from transportation, while the remainder is accounted for in accommodation, shopping, food, and other emissions. As we talk about climate change or the climate change emergency, this is the one statistic that has helped us realize the significant difference 1 or 2 degrees of warming will have. For every 1 degree the planet warms, we'll see 7% more moisture in the atmosphere. This means that if we get to 2 degrees warming, we'll have 14% more moisture in the atmosphere. And that will be 14% less in our rivers and streams and 14% more in our storms. Many of you will remember the recent report put out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. It surmises that the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees warming is 2 times worse when it comes to loss of animal life, extreme heat, and crop yields. If we want to keep below 1.5 degrees warming as recommended by the IPCC, we've got less than 12 years to make our difference. As our mayor here in Victoria put it, 2030 is the new 2050. And unfortunately, at a national level, only 2 countries are on track to meet the targets of the Paris Accord. Canada, for example, is listed as one of the top 10 emitters and is highly insufficient in addressing our targets. So we need all hands on deck. And this is where you come in. Good news is, carbon accounting is good for business. It can help you identify operational improvements. It can create environmental performing benchmarking, so you can track and set goals to reduce your emissions and become energy efficient. It can improve your government and community relationships, help you anticipate regulatory compliance and develop brand recognition and credibility, and is a great way to engage your stakeholders. Businesses that are participating in climate action are having no problems attracting and retaining top talent. So what is a carbon footprint? A carbon footprint is a calculation of the greenhouse gas or GHG emissions that are released due to the existence of your organization. To calculate your footprint, you'll take your business activities such as natural gas use and travel, Multiply them by established emission factors to get a measure of carbon dioxide equivalent. The footprint is measured within an established boundary and for a clear scope. We'll cover more on boundaries and scope shortly. Carbon footprints are also known as greenhouse gas inventories or GHG inventories, or simply emissions inventories. There are two key reporting standards. The global standard for carbon accounting is the GHG protocol. ISO also has a series of standards that cover organizations, projects, and verifications. And you may also come across industry-specific standards such as the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program, which is based on both the GHG protocol and ISO. So let's look at a few sample inventories to get us started. First one we'll look at is for the province of BC. We'll follow that with an international conference, a hotel, a whale watching company, and then we'll wrap up with a coffee roaster. This is a provincial level BEEP, or Business Energy and Emissions Profile, prepared by Climate Smart out of Vancouver. You can see that accommodation and food services, followed by construction, are BC's largest sources of emissions. This is the carbon footprint of an 800-person conference hosted in Chile. You can see that flights alone make up 85% of the emissions for a 3-day conference and activities. On the bottom of the slide here, you'll see some comparisons between cars per year or hotels per year, as well as barrels of oil. You may also want to note on this slide that the total emissions for this event were 1,400 tons, and we'll compare that to the coming slides. Here we have the carbon footprint of a hotel. Natural gas and staff commuting are the top two emissions, followed by electricity. Note, electricity will be much higher in provinces or states where electricity is derived from coal or other fossil fuels, whereas in this instance, we are running off BC hydro or hydroelectricity, and the emissions factors are low in comparison to other provinces. Looking at the comparisons along the bottom of this slide, you'll see that the total emissions for this hotel for the year are about a third of that of the previous event. This is the carbon footprint from a whale watching company. Again, thinking about those two previous slides, we're looking at double the emissions of a hotel, but only 2/3 of the emissions of that 3-day conference. And you'll also notice that fuel use makes up over 98% of this carbon footprint. So it's high intensity on the fuel consumption, but this organization is still tracking all of the other emission sources. This is the carbon footprint for a coffee roaster. You'll see that the two largest emission sources are natural gas and fuel, followed by shipping and staff commuting. So now let's look at establishing your carbon footprint. The first thing you want to do is establish your boundary. Most footprints in tourism are based on control approach. You'll also want to establish a geographic boundary. Are you measuring one hotel in a brand or all the brand hotels in a province, state, or country? The time frame is the simplest. You're generally looking at 1 year, except in the case of events, and you're either wanting to choose a calendar year or your fiscal for simplicity of reporting. Next, you'll want to outline your scope. It is important to take time to consider each potential source of emissions to ensure you capture everything that is relevant. Scopes 1 and 2 are mandatory for all reporting, while Scope 3 remains optional. Best practice is to include anything that will make up 5% or more of the total carbon footprint. Scope 1 includes all direct emissions. For tourism, these are generally the emissions combusted on site or in company vehicles, and would include things like natural gas, refrigerants, diesel, and propane. Make sure to consider funny things like barbecues or forklifts that may be powered by propane. These are easy to miss. Scope 2 is the simplest. This is your electricity use. Some organizations may have 2 or more meters. All you need to do is ensure that all are included. Finally, we have Scope 3. This includes business travel, paper, waste, staff commuting, shipping, and more. Depending on the availability of data, you may choose to focus on fewer sources in year 1, adding some of the harder to calculate sources in subsequent years. However, we recommend measuring as many of your sources as you can in year 1, as you may be surprised by the size of some of them. We've seen some hotels and restaurants where emissions from staff commuting are their second highest source. Here's another diagram or visual to help you understand the concepts of these scopes. So you can see in the center where scope 1 is the company-owned vehicle and the building in which they operate. Scope 2 is the electricity that is used. And then scope 3 is all the other emission sources that may exist due to the operations of this business. A key part of measuring your carbon footprint is establishing clear methodologies for collecting and analyzing your data. Keep track of how you collect and manipulate your data so that you can replicate the same methodologies each year. When sourcing data, try to find raw data sources. These are data points that have not been manipulated or transposed in any way and include invoices, receipts, and reports from your providers. Ensure your emission factors are up to date and locally relevant. Using an online software or professional carbon accountant can help ensure the quality and accuracy of your inventory. A few best practices to note include establishing a 5% materiality rule. This is used to establish whether a source needs to be included in your inventory or not. However, once you have established your baseline, it is important not to reduce your scope. It is also best practice to calculate your inventory every 1 or 2 years. We recommend annual reporting for most organizations until emissions have stabilized. One other practice you may hear about when it comes to carbon accounting is getting your report verified. A verification is a third-party review of your inventory, and it's a thorough analysis of the methodologies, data, and calculation. While it does add a layer of certainty and assurance, it's rigorous and time-consuming, and therefore costly. Verification may be required by some certifications or regulatory programs, but are not always necessary, especially if you're using a software or professionally provided service. So let's get back to this example of a hotel carbon footprint and review what we've learned about establishing a boundary, outlining a scope, collecting and analyzing data, and verification. The boundary for Parkside is the hotel and one company vehicle. The coffee shop and offices that are operated in the hotel building and managed by the hotel owner group are not under the hotel's control and therefore not included. The scope includes all scope 1 and 2 emissions. You can see them in green and orange, and they include natural gas, gasoline for the company vehicle, and fuel for a backup generator. Scope 3 includes water, waste, paper, travel, and staff commuting. As you can see, staff commuting is actually the second highest source of emissions for this organization due to the lower emissions in some of the other areas. Data is collected directly from invoices, surveys, and on-site waste assessments. The report has not been verified. It will, however, be reviewed by a third party, as Parkside has recently committed to offsetting their carbon footprint with offsetters. You'll learn more about the option to offset your carbon footprint in the third webinar in this series. Finally, I'd like to leave you with a little hope. This book, Drawdown, and subsequent TED Talks, podcast features, and loads of other content online outlines the top 100 solutions to reversing global warming. In part 2 of the series, we'll explore some of the solutions as they relate to tourism organizations. Thank you very much for taking the time to learn about measuring your carbon footprint. I hope you enjoy the parts 2 and 3 of our webinar series to learn about strategies you can implement to reduce your carbon footprint and work to restore carbon balance. This wraps up the first part of the Synergy webinar series on climate action. If you have any questions, please reach out by email or follow the second link to book a one-on-one call with me sometime in the near future. I hope you enjoyed this webinar and will take the time to watch the remaining episodes and share the series with your network. Thank you very much.